The Robinson townhouse leaned toward the sea as if listening for news it had stopped receiving years ago. Salt stiffened the curtains, rain had eaten the mortar from the outer wall, and every week Violet found a new crack climbing through plaster her father once had polished to a mirror sheen. Her mother called it deferred maintenance. Violet called it what it was, a house waiting to be sold the moment Lenora Robinson found a buyer rich enough not to ask why a family of their name had fallen so far. At 23, Violet lived in the front rooms like a carefully managed guest. Her father's will had left her a substantial inheritance, but the money sat behind trust conditions her mother recited with clerical precision. Disbursement contingent on proper marriage, approved by guardian, in the family's strategic interest. Lenora was that guardian. Lenora approved no suitor who did not come with ships, votes, land, or debt-clearing connections. Cruelty in Lenora's hands was never loud. She did not break plates or raise her voice. She would look at Violet's dress and say, "You will wear the blue. Men of means respond better to restraint." She would review morning calls and say, "You will smile when Mr. Carrow repeats himself. His brother controls the rail line charter." She would pass over household accounts and say, "Your brother's physician has increased his fee. You understand the need for practical decisions." Practical decisions meant compliance. By midsummer, Lenora had moved them into the guest wing at Thornmere Hall, where the county's old families and newly rich fortunes collided over oysters and card tables. Thornmere belonged to the Whitlocks, who believed in long weekends that lasted 6 weeks. Every morning there were rides and tennis. Every evening music and bright cruelty under chandeliers. Violet attended as instructed, sat where she was placed, and held conversation like a porcelain cup she dared not drop. Her only unregulated hour came before breakfast, when mist still sat low over the kitchen gardens and the first servants were stoking fires. She walked then, always the same path past espaliered pears and clipped yew, toward the old stone wall where the sea wind found gaps and sang through them. That was where she met Elias Ward. He was Thornmere's gardener in the way a ship's anchor is merely metal. Everyone knew his name and almost nothing else. He handled roses with a care that made society women suddenly aware of his rough hands. He kept his hat low, answered in short phrases, and carried a scar from temple to jaw that turned gossip toward battle stories no one could confirm. Guests treated him as furniture with boots, ignored him until a hedge needed shaping, then summoned him with impatience and called his silence insolence. With Violet, he did not pretend charm. He nodded when she approached, sometimes handed her a pair of pruning shears, and walked beside her while dawn lifted colour into the sky. They spoke in fragments: weather, soil rot, a gull with a broken wing that had nested near the greenhouses. Once she asked where he had learned to graft citrus in cold climates. He said, "War teaches odd skills." Then he bent over a branch and offered nothing more. The peace of those mornings came partly from what he did not do. He did not ask what she planned to wear that night. He did not mention eligible men. He did not treat her as an asset under management. At luncheon one day, Lady Harbury watched Violet cross the terrace with damp hems and said brightly, "Our Miss Robinson has acquired a mute companion. How progressive." A few women laughed behind fans. A baron's son added, "Take care, Miss Robinson. Gardeners make poor conversationalists and worse investments." Lenora, seated at the centre of the table, buttered her roll and said nothing. She never defended Violet from social cuts that might soften her. Humiliation, she believed, was useful. A daughter who felt ridiculous was easier to steer toward gratitude when a wealthy proposal appeared. Violet lowered herself into her chair and swallowed the familiar ache. Across the lawn, Elias knelt by a bed of late peonies, wholly intent on dead-heading blooms no one else noticed. If he heard the laughter, he gave no sign. Everyone mocked the quiet companion because mocking cost nothing. They did not see that he was the only person at Thornmere with whom Violet could breathe. The disruption came 3 days later, delivered in Lenora's morning voice, the same voice she used for weather forecasts and upholstery complaints. They were in Thornmere's blue drawing room, where silver reflected rainlight and made even bad news look polished. Lenora stood at the mantel with a stack of correspondence. Violet had just poured tea when her mother said, "Mr. Bernard Pritchard will make his formal offer before the end of the season. You will accept." Violet set down the teapot too quickly. Porcelain clicked. "I have not agreed to court him." "This is not a debate." Lenora unfolded another letter as if checking shipping rates. "Mr. Pritchard can repair our standing and stabilize your trust. You will be civil until he proposes. Then you will be sensible." Sensible. The word had become a knife. Violet forced herself to ask the question that mattered most. "And if I refuse?" Lenora looked up for the first time. Her face was calm, almost bored. "Then I stop paying your brother's school fees and medical care immediately. The trust terms allow me to prioritize household solvency. I will do so." The room seemed to tilt. "Mother, Ned's treatment is expensive." Lenora smoothed the paper. "Sea lung does not cure itself through sentiment, neither does debt. Ned was 14 and brilliant with engines, with thin wrists and lungs that failed him whenever winter damp settled in. The academy in Southport had a physician who understood his condition. Without those fees, he would be sent home. Home had drafts and no specialist and a staircase he already climbed breathless. "You would use him to force me," Violet said before she could stop herself. Lenora's expression did not change. "I would secure all our futures. Do not romanticize disobedience, Violet. It is merely expensive." By luncheon, Violet's anger had hardened into something colder. Bernard Pritchard arrived late, smelling of expensive tobacco and sea wind, his waistcoat straining over prosperity earned in shipping and rumoured in less lawful trades. He bowed to Lenora first, then to Violet with proprietary warmth. "My dear Miss Robinson," he said loudly enough for neighbouring tables, "I trust your charitable gardening project thrives." A few men smirked. Violet kept her gaze level. "The roses are doing well." "Roses?" Pritchard laughed. "I meant your gardener. Ward, isn't it? Sturdy fellow, hands like a dock crane. You must be very compassionate, taking such interest in him." Across the lawn, Elias was carrying trays of seedlings toward the orangery, coat sleeves rolled. Pritchard followed Violet's glance and added, "One must admire your dedication to social improvement." Before Violet could answer, the doors at the end of the hall opened with ceremonial force. A liveried courier soaked at the hem from hard riding strode in under the gaze of 80 curious people. The palace crest, a crowned gull over crossed tridents, flashed on his breast. Conversations snapped off one voice at a time. "Delivery by sovereign command," the courier announced. The Duke of Malvern straightened, already extending a hand. 2 viscounts leaned forward. Lady Whitlock whispered, "At last. Something interesting." The courier ignored all of them. His eyes scanned the room, then the terrace beyond. Elias Ward. Silence moved like a dropped cloth. A footman stammered, "The gardener, sir?" "The recipient named in written seal," the courier said, "Elias Ward." Heads turned toward the lawn where Elias had paused, one tray balanced against his hip. For a moment he looked exactly as always, still unreadable, wind lifting dark hair at his temple. Then he set the tray down, wiped his palms on his trousers, and walked inside with unhurried steps that made nobles instinctively move out of his path. The courier presented a thick envelope sealed with black wax, and the sovereign crest impressed deep enough to catch light. Elias broke it. His eyes moved once down the page. Whatever he read altered nothing in his expression, but his shoulders settled into a different kind of stillness, alert, chosen, dangerous. Lenora recovered first. There appears to be some absurd misunderstanding. No one answered her. They were all watching the gardener with the king's seal in his hand. Elias folded the letter and turned, not to the host, not to the Duke, but to Violet. "Miss Robinson," he said quietly, "I need to leave for the capital within the hour. I require a temporary secretary I can trust. Will you come?" The words struck harder than a shout. Temporary secretary. Trust. Come. Pritchard barked a laugh too late and too thin. "This is theatre." Lenora stood. "Violet is not going anywhere with hired staff." Elias did not look at Lenora. He waited for Violet. In that suspended second, Violet saw the shape of her life, if she stayed. Engagement smile, signed papers. Ned's medicine held hostage forever. She also saw what she did not know. Why a palace courier rode for a gardener, where this road went, whether Elias was asking for help or using her as cover. Lenora's voice cut across the room, clipped and final. "You are not going." Violet heard herself answer clear enough that people at the far windows turned. "I am." Shock flashed, sharp and unguarded, across Lenora's face, gone almost immediately, replaced by iron. Violet. But Violet was already standing, napkin falling beside her chair. Her heart hammered so hard she thought she might stumble, yet her steps held. She crossed the room toward Elias through a corridor of staring faces. Women who had mocked her dawn walks, men who had laughed at rough hands, Pritchard gone mottled with fury. On the terrace, wind hit her full in the chest, smelling of rain and salt and cut grass. Elias matched her pace toward the service court without touching her. "Do you understand what you're choosing?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I understand what I'm refusing." They reached the stables where Thornmere's order dissolved into haste. Grooms were already saddling 2 fast horses and fitting a travel coach with fresh lamps. Someone had sent word ahead with startling efficiency. Elias moved through the activity with brief, precise instructions that people obeyed before seeming to realize they had obeyed. Violet climbed the narrow stairs to her room, packed with shaking hands, and discovered how much of her life could fit into one valise when she stopped pretending she belonged to parlours. 2 dresses suitable for travel, 1 notebook, her father's fountain pen, Ned's last letter folded soft at the edges. She hesitated over a pearl comb Lenora favoured and left it behind. When she came down, Lenora was waiting in the corridor, gloves buttoned, posture immaculate. "This childish display ends now," she said. "If you step into that carriage, do not expect my assistance when it fails." Violet held the valise handle until her fingers hurt. "You threatened Ned this morning. I presented facts. Return by tomorrow, and this can be forgotten." Forgotten meant surrendered. Lenora leaned closer, voice almost gentle. "You are not built for scandal, Violet, nor for politics. Men like Mr. Pritchard survive storms. Girls with romantic ideas drown." For years, those judgments had settled over Violet like wet wool, heavy and inevitable. Now they slid off. Maybe because Elias was waiting below. Maybe because fear had finally burned clean enough to make room for anger. Maybe because one defiance made a second possible. "If I drown," Violet said, It won't be because I stood still." She went past her mother and did not look back. At the carriage, Elias took her valise and set it inside. "Once we leave Thornmere," he said, "there may be attempts to stop us. Social, legal, less social. You can still choose not to come." "I've already chosen. Your family will pay for this." The truth of it landed hard. Ned's fees, her frozen accounts, letters sent ahead to call her unstable, ungrateful, compromised by a servant. Lenora would use every instrument available, money, reputation, law, and wield them without hesitation. Bernard Pritchard would not forgive public humiliation. If there was any chance he sought her inheritance for reasons beyond marriage, she had just stepped into his line of sight. Violet met Elias's gaze. "Then we move quickly." Something like respect crossed his face. "All right." He handed her into the carriage. As wheels jolted over the courtyard stones, Thornmere's bright windows receded behind sheets of rain. Guests crowded under the portico, craning for a final glimpse, their expressions transformed from amusement to hunger. A woman who had once called Elias a mute labourer whispered to her husband with visible urgency. A duke sent a footman running, no doubt with letters. The kingdom they were entering had rooms where one invitation could reorder a life. Violet had no permission, no guarantee, and no money she could freely touch. She had a sick brother depending on choices she could no longer make safely from a drawing room. She had a mother who would rather break her than lose control. She had beside her a man everyone had dismissed until a royal seal proved they had been blind. As the coast road unspooled toward the capital, Violet pressed Ned's letter flat against her palm and watched the storm swallow home. Whatever waited ahead, court intrigue, scandal, danger, would at least be hers to meet standing. Rain hammered the carriage roof hard enough to drown thought for the first mile. Violet sat opposite Elias, gloved hands clasped around Ned's letter, while lantern light rocked across his face and turned the scar at his temple into a silver line. He did not fill silence to soothe her. He checked the pistol at his side, unfolded the royal summons once more, and made a brief notation in a narrow leather book he kept tucked into his coat. At last Violet said, "What does a temporary secretary do for a gardener?" A corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "For tonight? Keeps records clear in case I don't." The answer landed with a chill sharper than the storm. "In case you don't what?" "Arrive." The carriage lurched over a rut. Outside, hoofbeats multiplied, then narrowed again as escort riders shifted around them. Thornmere had vanished behind rain and distance, but Lenora's voice kept pace in Violet's mind. Girls with romantic ideas drown. She straightened. "Tell me what I'm riding into." Elias watched her for a moment, as if deciding what weight she could carry. "I served in military intelligence," he said, "years ago." "Served," Violet repeated, past tense. "I vanished after an operation failed off the northern shoals, officially dead for convenience. Unofficially useful because dead men can work where titled men cannot." The storm seemed suddenly too small to contain the sentence. "You became a gardener. I became forgettable." He tapped the black-waxed invitation. "Until tonight." Before she could ask more, the coach slowed. Voices cut through rain. A sergeant's bark, a groom's protest, a gate chain lifting. Elias opened the carriage door before the driver could, stepped into mud, and vanished into lantern glare. Violet shifted toward the opening. At the toll gate, 3 county constables stood under dripping cloaks, one holding a folded document high to keep it dry. She heard only pieces. "Under guardian authority," Miss Robinson conveyed against her welfare. Return to Thornmere pending family review. Lenora had moved faster than weather. Elias took the paper, skimmed it once, then handed over the royal summons. The sergeant bent closer to the crest, blanched and snapped to attention so hard water flew from his hat brim. "Apologies, sir. We were instructed." "You were instructed by people with money," Elias said. "Now be instructed by the Crown. Open the road." The chain dropped. The carriage rolled forward. When he climbed back in, soaked through at the shoulders, Violet said quietly, "How many papers can she send before we reach the capital?" "As many as she can pay for." He shut the door with controlled force. "And Pritchard can pay for more." By dawn they had left the coast. The road climbed through pine and slate villages, then descended toward the river plain where the capital sat behind old walls and newer ambition. At each posting in, Elias changed horses and routes, never using the same road twice in succession. Twice he sent riders away with sealed notes. Once he burned a letter unread after checking its wax. Violet wrote where he told her to write: names, times, places they passed, people who approached the carriage, insignias on wagons heading east. Secretary work exactly as promised. But beneath the practical task was something else, being trained quickly to watch. At a midday halt, she asked, "Who are we hiding from?" "Not hiding," Elias said, tearing bread in precise halves. "Outpacing." "Who?" "Men who lose fortunes if certain cargo records are reviewed." "Cargo like Pritchard's?" His gaze flicked up. "Why him first?" "Because he announced ownership of me before dessert." A dry sound escaped him that might have been a laugh. "Fair." He set down the bread. Pritchard's shipping lanes intersect with routes tied to sabotage during the war. Powder ruined at sea. Engine parts rerouted. Medical stores delayed until camps failed. Individually, accidents. Together, pattern. I've been tracing the pattern. You think he profited from wartime deaths? I think he wasn't alone. The river appeared by late afternoon, broad and iron grey under low cloud. Beyond it rose Asta's capital, domes, chimneys, bell towers, palace spires above everything like white bone. Violet had seen it twice as a child from the safety of carriages and formal calls. It had seemed then like theatre painted for someone else's life. Now it looked like a machine, beautiful, grinding, hungry. They crossed at Westbridge under armed inspection. A guard captain approached their window, glanced at Elias, and his face changed from irritation to rigid deference. "Proceed to Palace Annex 2, private entrance," the captain said. "Orders are current." Current, as if orders could expire by the hour. Annex 2 was not the palace of state dinners and portraits. It was a severe stone building tucked behind ministry courts, with narrow windows, 2 iron gates, and sentries who never looked idle. Elias brought Violet through a service corridor lined with maps and locked doors, then into a small office with plain furniture and 1 narrow bed built into the wall. "You'll stay here for now," he said. "Interior rooms are safer." "For me or for your paperwork?" "For both." He handed her a ring of keys, each tagged with coloured thread. "Blue opens the records room. Red opens this office. Black you don't use unless I tell you." That inspires confidence. It should inspire caution. He was at the door when she said, "Elias, if people come with legal orders from my mother." "I know." "That's not an answer." He turned back. "I can shield you from force. I can't erase trust law with a signature. If Lenora frames this as incapacity or coercion, we'll need someone above county courts to stop it." "Do you have someone above county courts?" A pause. "Sometimes." Then he was gone, leaving rain scent and unanswered rank behind him. Complications arrived in packets with neat handwriting. The first was from Southport Academy, forwarded through 2 offices and stamped urgent. Violet opened it with shaking fingers and read that Ned's term fees were unpaid. Physician access suspended pending settlement within 10 days. The headmaster's tone was apologetic and final. The second was from her bank in Astor Harbour. By instruction of acting guardian Lenora Robinson and under Clause 7 of Trust Oversight, all discretionary withdrawals are frozen until family status is regularised. There was no salutation, only legal courtesy. The third came by courier at dusk, sealed with Lenora's grey wax. Violet broke it standing at the narrow desk while clerks passed in the corridor. Return immediately. Accept Mr. Pritchard's proposal at the assembly planned for fortnight's end. Your brother's care resumes upon your compliance. Resist, and do not expect rescue from consequences you invited. No signature beyond initials. L.R. No anger, no plea. Terms. Violet folded the letter with exact edges and set it beside Ned's school notice. Her hands did not shake now. They burned. When Elias returned near midnight, coat dusted with road grit despite never leaving the capital as far as she knew, she held out the 3 letters without preamble. He read them in silence. She's escalating fast, he said. She threatened a fortnight. I may not have 10 days for Ned. I'll route emergency funds quietly. With whose money? Mine. No. The refusal came sharp. I won't trade one dependency for another. His jaw tightened. This isn't charity. I know, that's worse. She took a breath she didn't want to need. If I accept private help from a man my mother already calls my abductor, she'll use it in court as proof of compromise. He looked at her, then gave one short nod. You're right. The nod cost him. She saw it. He was used to solving problems with action, not waiting while law strangled people politely. Then give me access, she said. Records, offices, whoever signs emergency petitions. If I can't spend my own inheritance, I'll find legal grounds to compel Ned's care as dependent kin. You'll make enemies. I've already made the expensive kind. For the first time since Thornmere, Elias looked at her as if recalibrating the category she occupied in his mind. Blue key at dawn, he said. Archives open at 6. Palace Annex. 2 by daylight smelled of ink, coal dust, and old secrets. Clerks in grey coats moved in lines between pigeonhole walls. Messengers with ministry seals ran up narrow stairs and never slowed. Violet sat at a side table in the shipping records room, copying manifest numbers from weathered ledgers into clean columns, while a junior clerk pretended not to notice she was there. Miss Robinson? She asked him once. No reply. Excuse me, where are the 14th Fleet manifests for Year 12? He reached past her to hand the requested volume to Elias, who had just entered, then bowed. To the gardener. Lord, the clerk started, then choked on the rest and fled with scarlet ears. Violet watched the door swing shut. Did he just call you? Careless, Elias said. That was not an answer either. He set down 3 coded dispatches. Transcribe these first. Each sheet held columns of cargo notations that made little sense at a glance. Lamp oil marked as lace. Coal tonnage filed under medicinal cloth. Identical shipments arriving in different ports on impossible dates. Violet copied anyway, then circled recurring marks. A triangle cut by a vertical line appeared again and again beside vessels linked to Pritchard Marine Consolidated. By the 4th hour, her eyes ached. By the 6th, she had enough pattern to ask better questions. These symbols, she said, tapping the page, aren't quantities. They're permissions. Elias stilled. Explain. Look here, same ship, same declared cargo, different symbol at departure and arrival. If this were inventory, it wouldn't change mid-journey. But if the mark means who can inspect, Then changing mark means changing protection. He leaned over her shoulder, close enough that she could feel heat through damp wool. Who taught you to read ledgers like that? My father, she said, before the memory hit full force. Summer evenings at the townhouse dining table. Ink on his cuffs, murmuring that numbers lie less than men if you ask the right question. She swallowed and pushed the page toward him. Did your operation fail because someone inside Admiralty rewrote it inspections? His expression shuttered. Among other reasons. A knock came sharp at the records room door. A palace solicitor entered with 2 guards and a document case. Miss Violet Robinson, he said in rehearsed neutrality, I carry a petition for immediate protective custody under family guardianship, citing concerns regarding undue influence and reputational harm. So it had reached here. Elias stepped between Violet and the solicitor. Denied. The solicitor lifted his brows. On what authority? Elias took out a black signet Violet had never seen, pressed it into sealing wax on the desk, and turned it so the crest caught light. A crowned gull crossed tridents, and beneath it, the veil falcon. On this authority, he said. The solicitor went pale, bowed to Violet this time, and backed out without another word. When the door closed, Violet said, very quietly, Who are you? He did not answer for a long moment. Then, someone who should have told you sooner. The summons came at dusk. Closed briefing. Sovereign Chamber 3. Essential personnel only. Elias read it, then held out his hand for Violet's notes. Bring everything, he said. Sovereign Chamber 3 lay beneath the palace proper, behind 2 checkpoints and a steel-bound door, watched by Marines in ceremonial dark blue. Inside, the room was windowless, circular, lit by hanging lamps, over a central table carved with coastal charts. 6 people were already there. The Lord Chancellor, the Admiralty First Secretary, 2 magistrates Violet recognized from newspaper sketches, an elderly woman in archivist black, and at the head, King Alaric himself, older than portraits, eyes bright and unsparing. Violet stopped on instinct and dipped into the deepest curtsy she had managed in years. The king's gaze moved from her to Elias. You kept her out of uniform protocol, he said mildly. I kept her alive, Elias replied. Fair. The king gestured them forward, and overdue, shut the door. It closed with a final metallic thud that made private scandals feel very small. Alaric rested both hands on the chart table. Miss Robinson, you are present because your work intersects active treason inquiries. What you hear does not leave this chamber without my sanction. Do you accept? Violet heard her own voice answer, Yes, Your Majesty. The king nodded once, then turned to Elias. Enough ghosts. Name yourself. Elias, no, not Elias, removed the plain gardener's coat and laid it across a chair. Under it was a dark military-cut jacket with no decorations save the same falcon's signet at the collar. Adrian Vale, he said, Commander, Crown Intelligence Service, nephew to the Sovereign by acknowledgement and decree. The air left Violet's lungs, as if struck out of her. Thornmere mornings snapped through her mind, soil under fingernails, clipped hedges, silence at dawn, now lit by a different truth so bright it hurt. The king continued as if discussing weather and war in equal measure. Lord Adrian was reported dead 7 years ago after exposing a sabotage channel within Admiralty procurement. We allowed the report to stand. Dead men attract fewer knives. One magistrate slid a packet toward Violet. Inside were ship manifests she had copied that morning, each overlaid with intelligence annotations and casualty lists from wartime sinkings. Emergency recall became necessary, the magistrate said, when current year manifests matched the same cipher architecture from year 12. Those marks in your hand, Miss Robinson? They tie Bernard Pritchard's fleet to the old network. Violet stared at Pritchard's name repeated beside dates, ports, and units that had starved waiting for supplies that never arrived. Men had died while someone invoiced profit. She lifted her eyes to Adrian. "You asked me to come because I was convenient," she said, "or because you trusted me?" His answer came rougher than usual. "Both. I trusted your mind. I used your proximity to Pritchard. I should have told you." The honesty, late and insufficient, landed harder than another omission might have. Hurt rose, clean, furious, clarifying. Before she could speak, the elderly archivist in black cleared her throat. "Your Majesty, with permission. There is a secondary matter concerning Miss Robinson's legal jeopardy." "Proceed," the king said. The archivist set a small iron box on the table and turned its key. Inside lay 3 slim ledgers bound in fading green leather, edges worn by sea damp and handling. Violet knew them instantly. Her father's hand had stitched the spines himself after a storm split the originals. She reached out, stopped short of touching. "These were lost after his death." "Not lost," said the archivist. "Sequestered under maritime review. Your father, Arthur Robinson, submitted encrypted port ledgers to Crown Intelligence 2 weeks before he died. He named you sole deciphering heir in a sealed note to be released upon your legal majority." "Then why didn't I receive them?" The archivist looked briefly at the Lord Chancellor. "Because your guardianship petition from Lady Lenora requested delay on grounds of emotional fragility. Then additional petitions cited your unsuitability for financial burden pending marriage." The words scraped. Unsuitability. Pending marriage. Every sensible pressure campaign in Lenora's voice rearranged itself into mechanism. The Lord Chancellor spoke carefully. "If Miss Robinson married Mr. Pritchard, spousal access statutes could have given him derivative rights to household business archives, including these ledgers, once unsealed." Violet's laugh came out sharp and joyless. "So that was the strategy. Dress me, display me, transfer me, and hand over my father's records as part of the trousseau." No one contradicted her. Adrian's hand tightened on the back of his chair. "I didn't know about the ledgers until an hour ago." "Another thing you didn't tell me in time." He accepted the blow without defense. The king, to his credit, did not interrupt the silence that followed. He let it stand until Violet looked at the green ledgers again, seeing not relics, but leverage. She put both palms on the table, steady now. "What encryption did my father use?" she asked the archivist. The woman blinked. "A harbour substitution cipher layered with tide tables and personal shorthand." "Can it be broken?" "With effort." Violet straightened. "Then we break it tonight. Not through Lenora, not through Mr. Pritchard. Through me." The Chancellor began. "Miss Robinson, this is sensitive material. Public handling could—" "Public handling is the point," Violet said, turning to face him fully. "My mother is already painting me unstable. Pritchard is already buying legal machinery. If these ledgers vanish into another private inquiry, they'll call me hysterical and him respectable. I want certified copies, magistrate witnesses, and my name attached to every decoded entry." The 2 magistrates exchanged a quick look, alarm, then reluctant admiration. Adrian watched her with something like grief and pride, tangled together. "You realize what that makes you," he said quietly. "A target," Violet replied. "I already was one. This way I choose the battlefield." King Alaric's mouth twitched, almost approving. He tapped the iron box once with a ringed finger. "Granted," he said. "Under royal protection and full legal attestation. Miss Robinson, decode your father's ledgers. Lord Adrian, no more concealment from your chosen analyst." "Understood," Adrian said. Violet met his eyes across the table. "No more half-truths," she said. None, he answered. The chamber lamps hissed softly overhead. Outside, above stone and steel, the capital moved through evening unaware. Inside, Violet pulled the first green ledger toward her, opened to the initial page of her father's neat, slanting script, and began to read the trap they had built for her, line by line, as evidence. The first line looked innocent. Brine Widow, lamp oil, 40 casks, Harrowport to Eastreach. Inspection mark, triangle/bar. Violet traced the symbols in the margin with ink-stained fingers. Her father's shorthand sat beneath it, nearly invisible unless tilted to lamplight. Ebb 6, lantern red. Invoice split. Ebb 6 means 6th tide window, she said, more to herself than to the room. Lantern red was his note for military cargo disguised as civilian fuel. Invoice split means 2 manifests, one public, one restricted. The archivist leaned in so fast her sleeve brushed the page. Can you certify that? I can explain it, Violet said. Certification comes from patterns. She turned pages, matching symbols against tide tables spread beside the ledgers. Adrian moved around the chamber, collecting related manifests. Magistrates sealed each decoded page with wax and signature. The king stayed longer than protocol required, silent, watching. By midnight, they had 32 linked entries. By 1, 50. By 2, enough to sketch a network. Pritchard chartered vessels, false cargo declarations, inspection waivers approved by the same cluster of Admiralty clerks during the war years Adrian had named. At 2:30, a secretary from the Chancellor's office burst in without knocking, hair damp with sweat, a folded broadsheet in his hand. Printed at evening press, Your Majesty, already circulating in the upper wards. He laid the paper down. Violet read the headline once and felt heat rise behind her eyes. Miss Robinson abducted by disgraced officer, claiming royal blood questions of female capacity, coercion, and palace overreach. There was more. Insinuations about impropriety, about garden-level intimacy, about Violet's instability following her father's death. A quote from Lenora, unsigned but unmistakable in tone, lamented her daughter's fragile judgment and pleaded for discreet family restoration. Adrian's voice went flat. Who printed? Dockside Gazette first run, reprinted by Morning Herald's night editor. The Chancellor swore under his breath and passed over 2 additional documents, both stamped High Chancery. Petition 1, he said, requests immediate reinstatement of Lady Lenora's exclusive guardianship powers pending competency review. A magistrate snorted. Competency review? For a legal adult? Petition 2 seeks injunction to remove these ledgers from Crown Intelligence custody to neutral civil preservation by dawn. The archivist went white. Neutral means purchased. Likely, said the Chancellor. Filed by Bernard Pritchard's counsel and endorsed by 3 members of Parliament citing dangerous conflation of personal vendetta and state prosecution. Violet looked from one face to another. If the injunction holds, the older magistrate answered bluntly. Chain of custody fractures. Defense argues contamination. Every page you decode becomes unverified interpretation by a distressed woman in a locked room. And the guardianship petition. If granted, your testimony can be constrained through guardian counsel. His jaw tightened, meaning your mother. The stakes arranged themselves with horrifying clarity. Not just her reputation, not just money. Truth itself could be filed into irrelevance. The king tapped the table once. Can I void these tonight? Not without igniting a constitutional fight by breakfast, said the Chancellor. And the men she and Pritchard have paid are counting on that. Alaric's expression hardened. Then we do what can be done before dawn. Seal every decoded page with dual magistrate attestation and Royal Archive duplicate. Move faster than their paperwork. He turned to Violet. Miss Robinson, can you continue? Violet thought of Ned at Southport, denied treatment while adults debated jurisdiction. She dipped her pen back into ink. Yes, Your Majesty. They raced the clock until lamps guttered. Adrian fetched manifests. Violet decoded. The archivist cross-referenced old port weather logs, while junior clerks carried hot water and fresh nibs with trembling hands. Outside, corridor bells marked each hour like a warning. At 5 minutes past 5, a Marine captain stepped in with soot on his cuff and urgency in his voice. Sir, smoke from Annex 2 Records Wing. Adrian was already moving. Which corridor? East stack, lower rooms. The ledgers stay here, he snapped, and was gone before the captain finished nodding. For 1 second, Violet kept writing because her hand had learned momentum. Then the smell reached the chamber. Oil-heavy smoke, unnatural and fast. Seal the box, the archivist said sharply. Now. They closed 2 decoded ledgers inside iron custody cases as bells began clanging through the lower levels. A clerk stumbled in coughing hard enough to fold over. Fire jumped the stairwell, he gasped. Someone blocked the west exit. Blocked, not accident. The chamber broke into controlled chaos. Guards, orders, wet blankets, shouted routes. Violet clutched the 3rd green ledger to her chest, while a magistrate dragged a map stand aside to reveal a narrow service door. Through there, he said. Archive vault route. Smoke hit the tunnel in waves, low and black. Halfway down, someone behind Violet cried out. A shelf had gone over in the corridor, cutting 2 clerks off. She turned instinctively, but the magistrate shoved her forward. If you stop, you all go down. They reached a stone vault vestibule where air was breathable. Violet bent double, coughing, eyes streaming. When she straightened, the ledger felt lighter. Too light. She stared at her hands. The book was there, but the front section had torn free, pages ripped out cleanly at the stitching sometime in the scramble. No, she whispered, flipping through jagged binding thread. Page 1 through 37. Gone. Those were the key pages. Cipher index, names column, harbour substitutions. The spine where her father had hidden method and meaning was a wound. Adrian found them minutes later. Face streaked black. Left sleeve burned through at the forearm. Are you hurt? She thrust the ledger at him. It's been cut. Someone took the first signatures and cipher key. His eyes scanned the damage once, then shut briefly in naked fury. Inside job, he said. The fire was cover. Before she could answer, another courier barreled in, breathless, carrying yet another packet marked urgent. Violet ripped it open. Southport Academy letterhead. Different hand this time. Hurried ink. Miss Robinson, your brother, Edward Robinson, was collected at dawn by authorised family agents, presenting Lady Lenora's sealed directive and medical transfer papers. We were informed he would be relocated to private care in the capital. He appeared distressed but compliant. We had no legal basis to refuse. Please advise destination for forwarding his effects. The room went quiet around her. Ned is gone, she said, and heard her own voice as if from far away. She took him. Adrian read the note, jaw flexing. We'll find him. How? Before she moves him again? Before she tells him I abandoned him? The words broke on smoke-raw throat. Everything I had to protect is either burning or in her hands. He reached for her. She stepped back, not from him exactly, but from the unbearable softness of being steadied when she wanted to shatter. This happened on your watch, she said, then flinched at herself because it was cruel and also true enough to wound. Adrian took it without protest. Yes. The older magistrate approached, voice careful. Miss Robinson, we retained certified copies from the second ledger and most of the first. Not all is lost. Enough is, she said, because the missing section held the cleanest bridge between coded marks and named buyers. Without it, Pritchard could still call coincidence. He could still call her hysterical. And Ned was missing. By noon, the fire was contained. 2 clerks were in hospital with smoke damage. 1 guard had a fractured skull from falling masonry. The injunction to seize records arrived on schedule to a wing still stinking of burned paper. No one solved anything in that hour or the next. Adrian scrubbed his hands in a basin until the water ran grey, then pink where skin had split at the knuckles. The burn on his forearm throbbed under fresh linen. The surgeon had called it superficial. Pain said otherwise. He stood alone in a disused map room above the scorched corridor, staring at a wall chart of the Northern Shoals, where 7 years ago he had lost 11 agents and his own name in one night. Back then, a leak had rerouted a supply cutter into mined water. He had survived by drifting among wreckage until dawn, half-conscious, listening to men he knew call for help he could not give. Today's smoke had smelled different. The failure had not. A door clicked behind him. King Alaric entered without attendants, carrying 2 cups of bitter tea. "Your arm?" the king asked. "Attached." "Good, your temper?" "Less so." Alaric handed him a cup anyway. "You look like your mother when cornered." Adrian laughed once, harsh. She used to corner back. "Indeed." The king leaned against the table edge. "Say what you're not saying." Adrian kept his eyes on the shoals. "I brought Violet in because she was positioned near Pritchard, because she was sharp enough to see what trained auditors missed, because I trusted her. And because with her beside me, I stopped feeling like a ghost pretending to be useful." He swallowed, hated the admission, kept going. "I told myself concealment was protection. It was control. She paid for it this morning." The king said nothing. Adrian's grip tightened on the cup. "When the fire alarms rang, I looked for her before I looked for the ledger vault. For 10 seconds, maybe 15, the mission was second to finding one person in smoke. That cannot happen in command." Alaric's voice stayed mild. "Yet it did." "Yes." "And did she survive those 15 seconds?" "Yes." "Did the kingdom collapse?" "Not yet." "Then perhaps command is less purity and more choice under damage." The king took a sip. "You are not frightened of failing the mission, Adrian. You are frightened of wanting a life that is not mission." The words struck too close. Adrian set the cup down before he dropped it. "I buried that life deliberately," he said. "After the shoals. After I watched what affection costs people near me. People near you were already in danger because of what you hunted. That is a convenient absolution. It is also true." Alaric straightened. "If you intend to stand beside Miss Robinson, do it as a man she can see, not a mask that chooses for her." Adrian looked down at his bandaged arm, then at the charred edge of a map where fire had licked but not consumed the coastline. "I don't know how to be both," he said quietly. "Useful and honest." "Learn quickly," said the king. "She appears to have." When Alaric left, Adrian remained in the map room until bells marked the next hour. Then he took from his inner pocket the small leather notebook he had carried through war and exile, tore out the first blank page, and wrote one line in steady script. "No more strategic omissions, even when truth costs advantage." He folded it once and put it in his coat to give Violet when words failed. She was in the temporary records office, soot still at her hairline, sleeves rolled, reconstructing the missing cipher key from memory and surviving entries. She had made 3 columns. Certain, probable, guess. The guess column made her furious. She preferred certainty. When Adrian entered, she did not look up immediately. "I've rebuilt 9 substitutions," she said. "Enough to decode destination ports but not purchaser initials. We need corroborating invoices from Customs Court." "I've already sent for them." That made her glance up. He looked older than morning, and the burn wrap at his wrist had seeped through. "You're hurt?" "I've had worse." She set down the pen. "I was unfair earlier." "You were accurate earlier." Before either could continue, the door opened and the Chancellor came in with 2 sealed envelopes and a face that announced no good news at all. "From Lady Lenora's office," he said, "and from Pritchard's solicitors. Delivered publicly to ensure witnesses." Violet broke Lenora's first. "You have demonstrated the exact instability I feared. Flight, scandal, association with compromised men, and reckless endangerment of state records. Edward is now in private care under arrangements I can supervise. You may see him at Pritchard House tomorrow evening during the engagement assembly, where this disgrace can be corrected before respectable society and trustees. Decline, and Edward will be transferred to maritime climate treatment aboard the Caledon route at dawn following. You know his lungs cannot tolerate it. Below, neat initials, L.R. Her vision narrowed. She opened the solicitor's letter next. It was colder, legal, and worse. Formal notice that trust administrators would convene at the engagement assembly. Absent Violet's voluntary appearance, they would proceed on submitted affidavits of incapacity and appoint a substitute signatory in household interest pending review. Attached was a copy of her supposed consent letter, her name forged in a clumsy imitation, agreeing to marry Bernard Pritchard and reconcile with her guardian. "They're forcing forum and timing," the Chancellor said quietly. "Public room, invited witnesses, trustees in attendance. If you do not appear, they claim abandonment and move your assets. If you do appear without irrefutable proof, they pressure immediate signature." "And Ned?" Violet asked. "We have no independent location confirmation beyond this letter." Adrian's voice sharpened. "Then we raid Pritchard House tonight." "With what warrant?" the Chancellor shot back. "We lost clean linkage pages in the fire. You storm a magnate's residence on suspicion, and we hand his allies the constitutional scandal they're begging for." Adrian stepped forward. "He has a sick minor under coercive leverage." "He has papers saying family transfer," said the Chancellor, "signed by legal guardian." The room held stillness like a drawn wire. Violet read Lenora's line again. "You may see him," during the engagement assembly, and understood the move's elegance. Lenora had made her brother a living summons and wrapped it in etiquette. Adrian turned to her, all command stripped from his face. "You don't go alone." "I wasn't planning to." "Violet, this is a trap designed for your silence." She met his gaze. "Then we make noise." The Chancellor exhaled. "If you attend, we can place magistrates nearby under social pretext, but not openly. One wrong move and Pritchard claims persecution." Violet slid the forged consent letter beside her reconstructed cipher sheet. Paper against paper. The story they wanted, and the story she was still fighting to prove. "Tomorrow evening," she said. "Engagement assembly." Outside, bells began tolling curfew across the capital. Inside, with Ned somewhere in enemy hands and the cleanest evidence burned or stolen, Violet reached for her pen again. Not to sign, but to prepare. And the uncertainty in the room felt like storm pressure before lightning. Curfew bells were still echoing when Violet stepped out of the carriage at Pritchard House the next evening. The mansion blazed with light, hard enough to erase shadows. 3 rows of lanterns along the drive. Crystal flooding the entry hall. musicians in white gloves tuning under painted ceilings. It looked less like a celebration than a stage set for surrender. Adrian offered his arm. Tonight, he wore formal black with the veil falcon at his collar. No disguise left. 2 people on the steps gasped his name before swallowing it. Behind them, hidden in plain sight among arriving guests, Violet counted 6 faces she recognized from Annex 2. Magistrates' men in livery, a palace clerk disguised as a footman, 1 marine sergeant pretending to admire marble busts. Noise, she had promised. They had brought it quietly. Inside the grand hall, society arranged itself in predatory circles. The Duke of Malvern, Lady Harbury in silver silk, fan already fluttering. 3 trustees from the Robinson Trust Board stationed near the dais like solemn crows. At the centre stood Lenora, elegant in graphite satin, hand resting on Bernard Pritchard's sleeve as if she had always belonged there. And to Lenora's right, seated in a high-backed chair too near a coal brazier, was Ned. He looked smaller than Violet remembered from his last letter, cheeks pale against dark hair, but his eyes sharpened the instant he saw her. He started to rise. A man in household black, one of Pritchard's hired keepers, set a hand on his shoulder. Violet did not break stride. "Take your hand off my brother." The man hesitated. Pritchard gave the smallest shake of his head, smiling for the room. "Miss Robinson," he boomed, spreading his arms. "At last. We feared your advisers had misled you into further embarrassment." Lenora's smile held no warmth. "You are late, Violet. The trustees are waiting." "I'm here now." She went first to Ned, knelt despite silk and eyes and gossip, and took his cold hands between hers. "Did they hurt you?" He shook his head quickly. "No, just moved me twice. Mother said if I argued they'd cut my treatment and it would be your fault." Lenora said, for all to hear, "No one threatened Edward. I ensured his continuity of care when you absconded." Ned looked at the floor. Violet rose, fury settling into clarity. On the dais, a master of ceremonies struck a chime. "Honoured guests, if we might gather for the formal announcement." "Gladly," Violet said. The hall quieted, eager. Lenora blinked once, thrown by compliance. Pritchard recovered first, guiding Violet toward the dais with proprietary ease he mistook for control. "Splendid," he murmured near her ear. "Sign neatly, and we'll restore your brother's physician before midnight." Violet smiled without looking at him. "You should have let the ledgers burn completely." His fingers tightened on her elbow. "Careful." At the dais table lay 2 documents. Trust adjustment papers and a marriage consent. Fresh ribbons, new wax. The signatures line waited like a snare. A trustee cleared his throat. "Miss Robinson, before witnesses, do you affirm your intent to enter union with Mr. Bernard Pritchard and authorize integrated management of Robinson Holdings?" Violet took the top page, held it up, and let everyone see her own forged name at the bottom. "No," she said. The single syllable cracked through the hall. Pritchard chuckled too loudly. "Nerves, entirely understandable. Read the clause, darling." "I did read." She set the paper down and drew from her reticule a sheaf of certified pages sealed in red wax. "I also read shipping ledgers, wartime manifests, admiralty waivers, payoff books." Lenora's voice cut in, edged steel. "Put those away. This is neither the place nor the competence for your theatrics." Violet turned to the guests, not her mother. "You all came for an engagement. You may instead witness evidence." She opened the first page and began. "Year 12, 6th ebb window. Vessel brine widow, declared lamp oil, actual military powder under false inspection marked triangle bar. Clearance approved by Clerk Halvan at Admiralty Procurement Office 2. Payment routed through Pritchard Marine shell account, East Glass Holdings, 3 days later. Murmurs rose. Pritchard stepped forward, smiling gone. Fabrications copied by a distressed woman from charred scraps. Violet kept reading. St. Rilla, medical cloth declared, engine valves hidden in ballast. Delay at North Shoal, 11 days. Casualty report from 4th Coastal Engineers, 42 dead after field pumps failed. The Admiralty First Secretary, planted near the back as invited family friend, went visibly rigid. Pritchard snapped his fingers. 2 hired men moved from the side doors toward the dais. Adrian took 1 step, hand near his sidearm. Violet lifted her hand slightly. Wait. She turned a page. These entries are attested by 2 royal magistrates. Duplicate custody lodged in Crown Archive Vault 7 under sovereign seal. She looked directly at Pritchard. Try burning that. He lunged for the papers anyway. Violet stepped back, pivoted toward the orchestra, and said in a clear, carrying voice, "Would the musicians please play the 8th Regiment March?" For 1 suspended beat, no one moved. Then the first violinist, actually a Marine corporal, struck the opening bars, sharp and unmistakable. Instantly, the cellist at his side dropped his bow, drew a baton, and shouted, "By order of the Crown, all exits secured." Doors slammed, bolts shot, footmen became guards. Lady Harbury screamed. The Duke of Malvern tried a side corridor and found 2 magistrates already blocking it with drawn warrants. Pritchard swore and grabbed Violet's wrist, yanking hard enough to bruise. "You stupid girl!" She drove the heel of her shoe down on his instep and tore free. "Don't touch me." Ned coughed violently near the brazier. Violet moved to him at once, dragging his chair back from the heat while the hall erupted into shouts, silk, and boots. "Edward Robinson," she said low, steadying him. "Can you stand?" "With help." Adrian reached them as the guards closed in on Pritchard's men. 1 thug swung a decanter. Glass burst against a pillar. Another made for Lenora instead of escape, hissing, "You said no troops." Lenora recoiled as if from mud. "Remove him." "Gladly," said a magistrate, and clapped irons on both. The regimental march thundered louder, absurd and perfect under chandeliers, as the room that had gathered to watch Violet consent instead watched her take command of its collapse. Pritchard did not collapse with it. He stood in the centre of the locked hall, coat torn at 1 cuff, and laughed in Adrian's face while guards ringed him. "Arrest me on party gossip and a woman's notebook. Do it. By dawn, half Parliament will call this royal thuggery." A magistrate raised the warrant. "Bernard Pritchard, you are charged with fraud, conspiracy to commit treason, coercive confinement, document forgery, and obstruction." "Obstruction?" Pritchard barked. "Your records burned this morning. You have ash and melodrama." Lenora stepped forward then, chin high, every inch the controlled matriarch, even with chaos at her hem. "My daughter is unwell," she announced. "She has been manipulated by men with political agendas and a long-standing appetite for scandal. I invoke my rights as acting guardian to suspend her legal declarations pending medical review." She held up a sealed packet. Competency petition, filed and receipted. Several guests looked instantly relieved, as if handed a familiar script. Hysterical daughter, practical mother, disorder restored. Violet rose from Ned's side. "Read the receipt timestamp aloud." Lenora's eyes narrowed. "Irrelevant." "Read it." 1 trustee, sweating through his collar, took the packet and squinted. "Filed at 7:20 this evening." Violet nodded. "I was already inside this house under witness when you filed me incompetent, efficient." "It was precautionary. It was perjury." Pritchard cut in, quick to adapt. "Even if she's sane, she has no chain of evidence. Missing ledger index, burned annex, convenient royal relatives. My council will carve this to ribbons. Violet reached into her reticule again and withdrew a small brown glass vial and folded cloth. You're relying on forged trust papers and forged consent. Pritchard smirked. Prove forgery. She laid his original trust adjustment on the table, uncorked the vial, and dabbed a drop onto the signature block. Ink bled blue, then green, then lifted in a halo. Gasps rippled around the hall. Gallnut reagent, Violet said. Standard archive test for layered ink. My signature was traced over erased script. So was Clause 7, the one transferring derivative archive access to spouse. She turned to the trustees. You were asked to approve this tonight. Under your own rules, altered clauses without declarant initials void instrument legitimacy. The oldest trustee swallowed. That is correct. Pritchard's colour shifted. Chemical tricks. Then perhaps handwriting. Violet held up 2 letters side by side. Lenora's clipped note and the forged consent. My mother never loops her capital R. The consent letter does, twice. Her clerk does. Ask him. All eyes swung to a thin man at the wall Violet had noticed when she entered. He tried to bolt, collided with a guard, and crumpled. Take him, said the magistrate. Lenora's composure cracked for the first time. Coward. Pritchard lunged not for the door now, but for Ned, fast and ugly, one hand diving inside his coat. Adrian moved, too far. Violet threw the reagent vial at Pritchard's face. It shattered against his cheek in a burst of acrid liquid. He shouted, blinded, and the pistol he'd half drawn clattered across the parquet. Guards hit him a breath later, driving him to his knees, wrists wrenched back into irons. Adrian reached Violet, eyes blazing. Are you hurt? No. Ned stared at her, wide-eyed and a little awed. Vi, you just threw chemistry at a shipping magnate. You should try it in school. He laughed once, then coughed again, thinner this time. Across the room, Lenora stood very still, while a magistrate approached with shackles she had not expected to see. You cannot mean to chain me like common. Lady Lenora Robinson, said the magistrate, voice formal and merciless. You are detained for coercive abuse of guardianship, fraudulent filings, and conspiracy to obstruct Crown investigation. Lenora looked past him to Violet. You would do this to your own mother in public. Violet met her gaze without raising her voice. You did this to your own children in private. For a moment, Lenora's face emptied as if she had misplaced the expression required. Then the old disdain returned. You think you've won because men with badges stood behind you? Violet shook her head. I won because I learned to read what you hid. Lenora gave no dramatic collapse, no tears. She offered her wrists as if presenting gloves for buttoning, and let the irons close with a soft, metallic click that seemed louder than the shouts had been. Pritchard was hauled upright beside her, cursing through stained teeth, still fighting the grip of 4 guards. As they were taken toward the doors, he twisted back and spat. You are nothing without their protection. Violet gathered the attested pages to her chest and answered, And you are finished even with yours. This time, when the doors opened, there was no escape route waiting, only the black corridor of law. The hall emptied in layers. First the scandal-hungry gentry, then trustees under escort, then scribes carrying evidence boxes under seal. Broken glass glittered near the dais. Someone had stepped on a corsage. White petals streaked the floor like dropped paper. In a smaller withdrawing room off the main corridor, a Crown physician listened to Ned's lungs, while Violet sat on the ottoman beside him, still in evening gloves, stiff with dried reagent. Deep breath again, Master Robinson, the physician said. Ned obeyed, wincing. The physician nodded. Congested but stable. He needs clean air, regular steam therapy, and none of this forced travel nonsense. Can he return to Southport? Violet asked. Tomorrow, with an escort and revised payment authority. He glanced at her. The magistrate has signed emergency release of trust funds for dependent medical care pending guardianship revocation. The words landed like solid ground underfoot. Ned reached for her hand as soon as the physician stepped away. I'm sorry, he whispered. I believed her for a day. She said you'd run off for romance and left me for bargaining. Violet squeezed his fingers. You never have to apologize for being trapped by adults with documents. He gave a watery smile. You look terrifying out there. I felt terrifying. The door opened. Adrian stood there, jacket off, shirt sleeve rolled over fresh bandage, smoke and starch, and exhaustion clinging to him. He looked at Ned first. How's our engineer? Ned lifted his chin. Alive, slightly famous. Adrian's mouth softened. Good. A magistrate entered behind him with a leather folio. Miss Robinson, if you can sign these now, we can process immediate custody transfer and suspend all pending competency claims before midnight session. Violet took the folio. Her hand shook once over the first line. Not from doubt, from release. She signed, Violet A. Robinson. No coercion, no guided wrist. When it was done, the magistrate bowed and left. Silence settled, gentler now. Ned watched Adrian, then Violet, with teenage bluntness. Are you two all right? Violet and Adrian exchanged a look too complicated for a yes. We will be, Violet said. Ned, practical, even breathless, nodded. Good, because if I have to choose guardians again, I pick neither of you if you're being dramatic. That pulled a real laugh from all three of them, and with it something unclenched in Violet's chest she had been holding since Thornmere's blue drawing room. Outside the door, bootsteps and clerks and legal machinery kept moving. Inside, for one suspended minute, crisis loosened into possibility. 2 nights later, before dawn, Violet found Adrian in the palace glasshouse. It was the first hour she had ever associated with him. Mist on panes, damp soil, quiet work before society woke. Rows of citrus in clay tubs lined the path, leaves silvered by condensation. Adrian stood at a potting bench in shirt sleeves, trimming dead wood from a climbing rose as carefully as he once had at Thornmere. He looked up when she entered, shears lowering. You should be asleep. So should you. They stood with 3 feet of wet stone between them and months of unsaid things behind it. Violet broke the silence first. Ned left for Southport at first light. He made me promise not to turn any more assemblies into military operations without warning him. Adrian almost smiled. Reasonable condition. She folded her arms against the chill. The Chancellor told me this morning you submitted resignation from covert command. It's accepted. Just like that? Not like that. He set the shears down. It took an argument with 2 committees, my uncle, and a man who thinks invisibility is patriotism. But yes, I'm done running operations from shadows. Why? He held her gaze. Because I built a life on the idea that secrecy keeps people safe, and then I used that same idea to lie to the one person whose trust mattered more than operational advantage. Violet looked away to a pane streaked with dawn. You didn't only lie to me. You decided for me. I know. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded paper, and offered it. I wrote this after the fire. Read it or burn it. She opened it, 1 line, in his hand. No more strategic omissions, even when truth costs advantage. Violet read it twice, then looked back at him. A vow on paper is easy. Yes, his voice roughened. So here is the harder part. I loved you before I told you my name. I loved you when you thought I was only a gardener because you were the only person who spoke to me like I was human and not a weapon or a title. I loved you when you stepped into that carriage without permission. And I loved you when you threw acid at a shipping magnate and saved us all from my delayed draw. She made a strangled sound that might have been a laugh, might have been a sob. He kept going. I don't want to protect you by shrinking your choices ever again. I want to stand beside you while you make them, even when they frighten me, even when they complicate everything. I'm not asking you to forgive quickly. I'm asking to court you openly, honestly, for as long as it takes for trust to be rebuilt by actions, not declarations. The glass house was brightening by degrees. Outside, gulls called over the river. Violet stepped closer until she could see the fine tremor in his unbandaged hand. I was so angry with you, she said quietly. Not because you were Lord Adrian Vale, because I kept offering truth and you kept handing me edited versions of yours. I deserve that. Yes, she exhaled. And I am not interested in being your moral alibi while you continue a life I can't see. If we do this, it is visible. No hidden assignments, no vanished weeks explained by, trust me. Agreed. Disagreement spoken, not managed. Agreed. My work remains mine. I don't become an extension of your office. At that, something fierce and proud lit his face. I would never survive trying. She let the smallest smile break through. Probably not. He looked at her then with all the restraint gone. Violet, may I kiss you? No one had ever asked her that and meant it as honor rather than flirtation. The answer rose before fear could edit it. Yes. His hand came to her cheek, warm, careful, and when he kissed her, it was nothing like assembly theatrics or drawing-room possession. It was steady, reverent, and unmistakably chosen by both of them. When they parted, foreheads touching, Adrian let out a breath that sounded like relief after years underwater. I can't promise we'll never be afraid, he said. I don't need fearless. I need truthful. You have me truthful. She tucked his written vow into her pocket. Then you may court me, Lord Adrian Vale. His smile this time was real and unguarded. I've been doing little else since Thornmere. I'm glad you noticed. She laughed, full and surprised by it, and the sound echoed through citrus leaves and glass like a new season arriving early. Spring brought wind off the sea and a courtroom so crowded the ushers gave up pretending decorum. Violet stood at the witness rail in her new dark blue civil coat, silver seal of the Maritime Audit Office pinned at her collar. Across the chamber, Bernard Pritchard sat between barristers, heavier now with confinement and rage, his confidence worn thin by weeks of corroborated ledgers, dockmaster testimony, recovered cipher pages from his clerk's trunk, and his own failed attempt to draw a pistol at an engagement assembly attended by half the county. The Chief Justice looked over spectacles. Final statement before verdict? Pritchard rose. This prosecution criminalizes enterprise and punishes a man for courting badly. A rustle of disgust moved through the gallery. The justice's gavel cracked once. Sit down. He did. Lenora's hearing followed in a smaller chamber, quieter, and in some ways colder. She wore plain grey, no satin armour, and spoke in the same clipped tone that had governed Violet's life for years. I acted for family solvency, she said. Any mother would. Any mother does not file false incapacity petitions against an adult daughter while leveraging a minor son's medical care, the judge replied. Sentence came measured, loss of guardianship powers, permanent removal from trust control. Modest annuity disbursed quarterly under supervision. Required residence outside the capital and outside Astor Harbour districts, where Robinson funds were administered. Lenora did not look at Violet when the order was read. At the door she paused just long enough to say, "You have your independence. Guard it better than sentiment allows." Violet answered, "I learned from an expert," and watched her go. That afternoon, in the Maritime Archive office overlooking the river docks, Violet signed her first independent authorization as Director of Anti-Smuggling Audits. Clerks brought her flagged manifests. Inspectors waited for route priorities. A young analyst asked, nervous, "Ma'am, do we challenge this Admiralty waiver? It has parliamentary backing." Violet read the number, saw the old triangle bar notation buried under modern code, and marked it red. "Yes," she said. "We challenge all waivers that ask us not to look." At dusk, she walked home along the seawall to the Robinson townhouse. It no longer leaned toward ruin. Masons had reset the outer wall. New mortar held clean between stones. The front windows were open to salt air, curtains moving like breath instead of surrender. In the entry hall, a stack of embossed cards waited on the table. Requests, pleas, strategic congratulations. Lady Harbury requesting a wedding invitation in the spirit of renewed understanding. A viscount's wife offering to host a reconciliation tea with selected witnesses. Two families who had laughed at Thornmere now asking if their sons might call. Violet took a pencil, wrote regret, no capacity on 3, and placed them in the outgoing tray. From the back garden came voices. Ned home for holiday, demonstrating a brass engine model to Adrian near the restored pair wall. Adrian listened with complete seriousness while Ned explained pressure valves between coughs that were now mild, managed, no longer bargaining chips. Violet stepped onto the stone path. Both turned. Ned grinned. "Vey, tell him my design beats naval standard." Adrian said, "I already conceded after the second diagram." "You conceded after the fourth," Ned corrected. Violet smiled and set her satchel down. "Either way, we're revising naval standards." Beyond the wall, the sea kept its old rhythm against rock. The house listened for news again, but now it received it, sent it, chose what entered. Adrian crossed to her and offered his hand, not to lead, only to join. She took it. Inside, on the hall table, lay one final card addressed in the King's own hand, confirming the spring date for Violet Robinson and Lord Adrian Vale's wedding licence. No whisper now, no mockery about quiet companions, just ink, law, and a life chosen aloud. Violet looked once toward the door, where evening gathered, and then closed it gently against the past.